Wir freuen uns sehr, dass Sie heute zu uns gekommen sind. Wir freuen uns sehr auf Ihre Ausführungen und sind insbesondere auch deshalb gespannt, weil Sie uns eben verraten haben, dass Sie in der nächsten Woche nach Tokio zu G7 gehen. Vielleicht hören wir was Ihnen auf der Seele brennt. Und wir freuen uns sehr auf Ihre Ausführungen. Dankeschön, dass Sie gekommen sind.
Ich soll Englisch reden, nicht?
Sie können auch Deutsch reden.
I was told I should speak in English.
Then do it. Ist besser.
It's difficult. Most of you maybe will not understand me if I speak German. But if I will speak English, nobody will understand me. Thanks, Mr. Reddy. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. When I got your invitation to make this keynote speech here, I was a little bit shocked because I read it for the first time. So title you mentioned for me, Tectonic Shift, where will finance move to? And I said, oh dear. And you can probably imagine my relief when I read it again and realized that we are talking about a tectonic shift. And what, if any, will be the consequences for finance in the event of a Brexit? Nobody can honestly say how finance will react to a possible Brexit. Many experts have already expressed their opinions on this. Just recently, Mike Carney described the prospect of Brexit as the biggest domestic and financial stability risk facing the UK today. Will some financial institutions relocate to other centers within the EU? I think Mr. Weidmann has a little bit speculated yesterday evening in his dinner speech. Maybe there are some financial centers within the EU ready to step in, maybe not. I simply do not know. In fact, if anyone should know, it is you as representatives of the most important institutions in the financial world. And anything I might say would be pure speculation. And I do not deal in speculation. It's not my job as finance minister to deal in speculation. What I do is I help to set the regulatory framework in which banks and financial institutes operate. And I try to do this with the interest of taxpayers, rightly understood, all taxpayers in mind. So I cannot tell you what the future of finance is going to be. But what I can tell you is my role as finance minister is that together with my colleagues in the European Union, we will continue to work on improved banking regulation within the EU, with or even without the UK. We have come a long way since the banking and financial crisis, which started almost 10 years ago. Banks and financial institutions have always been the lifeblood of functioning market economies. But somewhere along the way, in the last decades, we got lost. Money was king, greed was good, and a new breed, the masters of the universe, was created. And the fundamental link between economic risk and reward was lost to devastating effect. The rules we have since agreed on are now showing the desired effect. Financial markets have become more stable, and the risk of having to use taxpayer money to save failing banks has fallen. This is mainly due to the measures we have taken at EU level to create a banking union and to improve, of course, in parallel as well, to improve capital and liquidity requirements. I do not have to explain these to you, but I do think that we can be proud of what has been achieved so far. These measures have improved financial stability within the euro area and will make the market less fragmented. But most importantly, that means that banks are better able to cope with any banking crisis in the future. The days when it was assumed almost with certainty that states would step in to save failing banks are gone. We have no bail-in rules. which re-established the relationship between risk and reward, rightly so. These rules should not be watered down, but implemented fully. The same is true for the TLAC standard we all agreed on in the G20. And so we have to ensure that banks have enough debt that they can be clearly bailed in. The 8% rule is a minimum, not a maximum. We are a little bit in discussions on the EU level, but I'm totally clear the 8% rule, which is taken in the BRD, by the way, is of course not a minimum. It's a minimum but not a maximum, and we will not. I am not ready to water down. Some of you here today might think that the rules are too invasive or too costly. But rules which would cost the banks little, but the taxpayer a lot, would not be worth the papers they are written on. It is essential now that these rules do not just remain on paper, but are actually applied in each member state to ensure the level playing field much needed. We have demonstrated that we can work together to make the EU a better place to conduct financial transactions. Or to say, people now that they can both bank in and bank on the EU. One of the foundations of banking union is, of course, the single supervisory mechanism. The ECB supervises the largest institutes based on their risk profile and influence on their domestic financial systems. I am aware that for many institutes, this might mean added work. But we are just at the beginning, and it takes time to get used to the new system. I also know that there is a lot of information to be provided to the ECB. But this additional work is necessary if, as desired, risks are to be identified in real time. The work so far can be seen as positive. The close cooperation between national supervisors and the ECB has put us on the way towards a form of European supervision which will be better able to identify risk posed by system-relevant banks. More still has to be done, and I will return to this briefly later. But allow me first for a minute to address another issue. The focus of the summit is one of the future of finance. But the future of finance is deeply embedded in the future of the EU. And the European Union consists of much more than the financial sector. It's about trade, values, security, prosperity. It's an expression of our economic, cultural, historical, and geographical ties, and our desire to use these ties to further our mutual well-being. The people of the United Kingdom face an enormous decision on the 23rd of June. Possibly the biggest political decision in a generation or more. And let me make this clear. The decision is one for the UK voters and for the UK voters only. I am not going to start lecturing anyone on how they should shape their future. And we will respect any decision reached in June, whatever that decision might be. But to be fair, I should also say regarding the vote that in means in, and out means out. I think Prime Minister Cameron reached a very good deal for his country on our summit in February, one that confirmed a special status for the UK, and one that demanded a lot from the other member states. But in contrast to what some are saying, this is the only deal on the table. There will be no renegotiation. An out vote cannot and will not be used as leverage to get a better deal. If the UK votes in, this deal will apply immediately. If it votes out, then the exit process begins. And I'm not going to lie to you. I think both the EU and the UK are better served with Britain remaining. I say this not only as a lifelong European, but also as a man used to making pragmatic decisions based on level-headed analysis. there is no doubt that there would be a future for the UK outside the EU. Britain can look back proudly on a long history of trade, innovation, invention, science, philosophy, and culture. In a list of history's most influential countries, it would have to be near to the top. Equally, I have no doubt that there is a future for the EU even without the UK. The EU represents a socio-economic project unique in history. It has ensured the longest ever period of peace and prosperity on the continent, a fact that is often taken dangerously for granted. Despite its relatively short history, it's now the single biggest market in the world. It has a GDP roughly equal to that of the US. It has created the world's second biggest currency. The world looks for the EU for leadership in so many areas, such as democracy, the rule of law, the use of soft power, social rights, environmental protection, foreign aid, the list goes on. This will not change should the UK leave. I cannot honestly see a more attractive model than EU membership. Again, this is a matter for the British. All that I want to say on this is whatever model the British choose, one fundamental principle applies: access to the single market comes with obligations. The more access, the more obligations. I do not agree with the view that the EU is incapable of reform. You only need to look at the developments in the last 5 to 10 years to see that. But I do agree with the UK that there are still areas where we need to make further progress. In banking, we should think further about orderly sovereign debt restructuring. This would strengthen incentives for sound economies and budgets and reduce the risk of contagion between the banking sector and sovereigns. We should also have a clear understanding of the process of how private creditors participate in such a debt restructuring. Without this, any future steps towards risk sharing within the EU, for example via deposit guarantee schemes, will just create false incentives, and we are left with the problem of moral hazard. We also need to look more closely at banking supervision. I am somewhat concerned at having decisions on European banking supervision and European monetary policy being made by the same institution. The ECB is doing what it can at present to keep the two areas apart, but a conflict of interests is nevertheless possible. But it would request a treaty amendment, and that's difficult to get because it needs an unanimous decision by 28 member states with ratifying procedures in all member states. Not very realistic in the given situation, I know. There are, of course, many other areas in which the EU could improve. We should and we could make better use for the EU budget. For example, to change spending so that resources are used to create real European added value, but with a lot of funds, European funds, actually is not really granted. The money that we are currently spending on structural and agricultural policies could and should be used to a greater extent to support key country-specific recommendations designed to improve the competitiveness of the member states. We could further deepen the market for goods and services and make progress when it comes to labor mobility. In terms of foreign policy and security, there is a vast room for improvement. The refugee crisis, for example, will only effectively be resolved when we pull in the same direction. We are beginning to see our efforts here bear fruit. Europe is always slowly, complex, difficult, but in the long term, it moves in the right direction. And outside our borders, in crisis regions of the world such as Syria or Ukraine, we do not exert the influence that we could and that we should. These are just some areas where the EU can and should change. But for those looking to change things, a gentleman reminder, change comes from within. Since it first joined in 1973, Britain has been a constant force for change in the European Union. Thanks partly to the British, the EU now has less wasteful agriculture and fishery policies, a liberal single market, a commitment to free trade, and 28 member states. Without UK, the EU would be less liberal, less efficient, and less influential on the world stage. Rest assured, in the 21st century, Great Britain's relationship with Europe will still remain special. But it should be defined not by splendid isolation, but by splendid integration. Everyone needs friends in this world, and the closer the better. It's true that British values and traditions sometimes vary from those of their continental neighbors. Looked at globally, though, they are much closer than many would have you believe. Don't forget, we share many hundreds of years of history, geography, philosophy. So, in thinking about these issues and our futures, we should remember the words of the British poet John Donne. No man is an island entire of itself, and every man is a piece of the continent, a part of the main. That's true today more than ever, and we would all do well to remember it. Thank you very much.
Dear Minister Schäuble, thank you very much for these warm, precise, and to-the-point remarks.